Greetings. Welcome to the World Congress. I attended the first World Congress in 1997. I flew out from my home in Asheville, North Carolina to San Francisco, which is where I was born. And I was very excited because that time the National Qigong Association was just founded the same year. I had been promoting the Healing Tao Instructors Association already at that point for 6 years. I considered it to kind of be a period of the birth of Qigong and related energetic healing that was taking place. That World Congress changed my life. I met a teacher there from China who's 81 years old, named Zhu Hui, who taught me Wu Qigong, which I translate, my modern translation of it today is primordial Tai Chi for whole body enlightened self-love. It gathers the chi from all the directions, from heaven and earth, integrates it with the I Ching, the 8 cycles, and produces miraculously quick energetic effects. I've probably done it thousands and thousands of times since then, and every time I do it is different. It's quite amazing. It works like based on the Chinese calendar of the 12 animals is 12 a cycle of 12 movements, and the 10 heavenly stems, which is a cycle of the 5 elements, and they work together, interlocking in this form. And because those energies change constantly, your experience changes constantly. Anyway, it's my hope that all of you who are attending this Congress will find similar stimulation and inspiration and self-empowerment, as I did when I first attended this in 1997. I'd like to give since I've sort of lived through even before this Congress, starting in 1980, when I first got into Qigong. That's 40 years of kind of an overview of what's evolved within the West as we've absorbed this energetic technology from from the East. And I think it might be helpful to look at this in a context of an even larger and longer historical process, which I see as basically a paradigm war between religion and science. And it goes back about, in the West here, to about 400 years ago, when the Catholic Church was persecuting Galileo for saying that the earth went around the sun, accusing him of heresy and threatening to torture him. So this paradigm war has been going on for a long time. And it's still going on today. And on one extreme, you have deity religion and all kinds of, theories of higher consciousness and spirituality, beings of various levels of consciousness and power. And on the other side, in science, you have the ability to manipulate matter, very practical ways. And really, they're each jockeying for power. And in the current world, the fastest growing religion, some people call it scientism, is the belief in the material manipulation. But what is most important and most interesting to me is the middle ground between the religion and science. And that middle ground is held by what I call, I like to frame as a loving energy science that incorporates the best from both religion and science. It brings in values of love, compassion, healing, and brings in systematic methods, ancient scientific methods that are repeatable and trainable and produce results. And that's what I believe most of the people attending this World Congress fall into, this middle ground. Qigong, Tai Chi, Taoist, energy healers, shamans, alchemists, philosophers, and artists. We're all seeking to empower and themselves and explore themselves without surrendering themselves to any kind of dogmatism, whether it be religious or scientific. And so I think it's important that we embrace our role at holding this middle ground, holding the middle path, and unify ourselves to consolidate that. And the value to the global community is that we resolve this paradigm war. I mean, it's not our scientists who have religious views. There are many religious people who accept science. It's silly to polarize this into extremes, but you need a concrete, practical, grounded center from which people can evolve and grow and learn. So that is what I believe the presenters at this Congress are offering as their contribution to that process. I've taught thousands of people the Qigong, the primordial Tai Chi form. So that seed that got planted in me at that Congress has gone out into the world. And I know there are many other of my colleagues in the Qigong world who also favor this form as being particularly efficacious. I've used it to guide my life and project what I need to create and manifest. And it's been a very, very central part of my, I'd say my whole path. Let me speak about that path a little bit so you have a better understanding maybe of where I'm coming from. I had we can call a dramatic Kundalini awakening in 1979. Now, what does it really mean to have a Kundalini awakening? What it means is you have suddenly shift from a sensory awareness. And in this case, I had a dramatic, like an explosion, like a mushroom cloud atomic bomb going up into the heavens and raining back down. And what it is essentially was the realization and the experience of being multidimensional. So this is very confusing to someone who has spent their whole life orienting themselves from their personality only. And of course, a Kundalini awakening is simply a dramatic instance of what all energy healers and all Qi cultivators are going through. We're all shifting multidimensionally in order to do our art, whether it's healing or self-healing or healing others. And so we have to develop a ground and a fluidity energetically that allows us to function multidimensionally. In 1981, years after I had this dramatic Kundalini experience, which led me to start doing Kundalini yoga and other things to try and regulate this, okay? Because I was like really so expanded and out of my body. I eventually turned to studying, trying Tai Chi and Taoist practices. And I ran into a young teacher in Chinatown named Montauk Chia. And it was only a few months after learning the orbit and the fusion of the 5 elements, inner smile, 6 healing sounds, some of the fundamental practices of Taoist internal alchemy. It was a few months after I began this that I had a visitation by what I could only later realize was a Taoist immortal. And this happened in broad daylight. After 3 days of feeling that my body was being cooked, and to jump in the shower was so hot, and I had diarrhea and nausea and just like a complete purging. And the strange thing was I didn't feel sick though, but I just couldn't figure out what was wrong. I went to the hospital, checked to see if hepatitis, and now everything was fine, blood test. On the 3rd day, mid-afternoon, lying in my bed, the room began to swirl, and this old Chinese man appeared, floating in from space. Long robes, a wispy beard, smiling. And I'm going, hey, dude, like, how'd you get in my room here? Okay. Who invited you? What are you doing? What's going on here? And he shot a beam from his navel into my navel center. You can say my lower dantian. And what was unusual about this light beam is that it was solid light. In other words, when that beam of light hit me, I felt something solid had hit my body. And again, I had another experience of completely dissolving and exploding in like a big, atomic bomb, the mushroom cloud, raining back down, but feeling total bliss and love. And the Tao immortal disappeared. This, of course, we could say propelled me on this path, since I had to try and reconcile this experience with my, my reality. And in retrospect, I just took it as a quickening, a visitation from beings in higher realms, took on a form just for me, just to have some focus. I'm sure this guy doesn't look like this normally. He just created, crystallized himself into a form to communicate something to me. And this is what propelled me to study Taoist internal alchemy and its combination with Qigong over the last 40 years. The whole issue of immortality, a notion of a Taoist immortal. By the way, I had never heard of a Taoist immortal at the time, so it was impossible for me to imagine this, okay? I had no context, nothing in my imagination that could do this, create this as some might accuse me, but it was completely real daytime physical experience. So this journey has been amazing, and it's really taken me deep into this loving energy science, this Taoist, ancient Taoist science. And I think that it's very relevant in today's current, we'll say, global medical crisis, to look at that issue of life and death and immortality. And I think everyone attending this Congress, and we're having to do it virtually because of our fear of death. And maybe I should preface my remarks at this point by saying, what has exactly been my response or my experience during this pandemic. And I was observing very closely the connection between the events in Wuhan, China, and the Chinese calendar, beginning of a new 12-year zodiac. This is a golden rat year. The gold is the metal element connected to lungs, okay? And I saw this connection that seemed to be going through possibly a global healing crisis. And this is a natural part of a cycle that we had to clear out in the first year of this 12-year cycle. This golden rat energy was going to take out the vulnerable and the weak and awaken everybody to issues that they needed to face in order to evolve. So my perspective is that this pandemic is not a tragedy. It's not a terrible thing. It's just nature. It's just a cycle. Souls come in, souls go out. Birth and death are just part of the cycle. And we needn't fear death. It's one of the issues of seeing people die and all the intense media focus on death, which is strangely, I mean, I'll discuss this more, why there's such an obsession about this one particular disease when there are many other infectious diseases which are far worse, far more widespread than COVID, such as pneumonia and tuberculosis, the biggest killers on the planet, 4.5 million every year, with no lockdowns, no mask wearing, except on the part of those who are diseased. So this is obviously something, I think, in part of this battle between religion and science, and we have a constellation of forces which are seeking power. I call them the Gang of Five. Okay, it's big pharma, big media, big government, big money. Okay, and big data. That's the Gang of Five, and they all have a different investment and a different agenda here. But they're all using this pandemic for their own ends. And my message is it's those of us who are holding the center and believe in natural healing and self-empowerment and the integrity and the sovereignty of the body are being marginalized, attacked, censored. And we need to hold together and hold that central ground and hold dear our liberties, our constitutional rights for those who live in countries that have those liberties. So I am so grateful to Effie Chow and her efforts to continue this Congress. I know she has not had one every year, so this is the 20th annual one. And that's a great accomplishment. Hats off and kudos to Effie Chow. And this year she's supported by Livia Cohen and promoting this. And so I'm deeply grateful for, this community and the diversity and the richness of it. Let 100 schools of energy healing and energetic movement, sacred dance, let them all flower, but let them all recognize their commonality, which is basically a connection to belief in the life force as being the primary causal factor in our lives. And all of us finding different ways to explore that and explore how to empower ourselves and complete our mission, our destiny, what the Taoists would call the Ming. Your worldly destiny is your Ming, and our spiritual destiny, or Xing, Xing in Pinyin, is our common destiny. We're all going to return back to source. And this is the teaching of Lao Tzu. This is the main message of the Tao Te Ching. Return to origin. What does that mean, though? It doesn't mean leaving your body and going somewhere else where the origin is. It means going deeper inside of your body, into the core. And the Taoist notion of Ziran, Z-I-R-A-N, the self-arising. We arise from that. We're born from within. It happens to be a quote from the Bible as well, okay? So it's not necessarily, the Taoists don't necessarily have a unique or exclusive viewpoint here, but they have a very deeply developed theory and practical ways to cultivate our relationship to that life force. And that is what I'm suggesting we need to codify as a loving energy science, where we bring in the spiritual values and the values of science and systematic exploration and the practical applications. This year, how did I respond to this pandemic? Basically, I didn't change anything, because I have zero fear of getting the flu or the COVID-19 version of it. I haven't had the flu in 50 years, or 60 years, I don't know. I'm 69 years old now. Supposedly a vulnerable part of the population is older. I have a 7-year-old child, nearly 7. When he gets the flu, I don't get it. My approach, I had my last corporate job was in 1977, where I had health benefits. I was in publishing in New York. My boss fired me. I asked her why. She said, "You're too creative. You don't belong in this corporate world." She was right. I went off and became a journalist in Africa. But I stopped. I never bought health insurance since then. I decided I needed to take responsibility for my own health. And you couldn't buy it from somebody else. And it's not that I'm opposed in any way to Western medicine. My father was a heart surgeon. My grandfather was a chest surgeon and a general in the medical corps in the U.S. Army. I grew up around hospitals and have total respect for the contributions of Western medicine. But when I started going to China and taking groups, I've been to China 21 times. First started going there in 1985. When I started taking groups and to the medical Qigong clinics in China, I discovered that the Chinese approach was, oh, you're sick, what do you have? Acute, get the Western treatment. Chronic, get the Chinese treatment. The mother of my child is a acupuncturist and herbalist trained in Taoist traditions, Chinese Medical College here in Nashville, North Carolina. So I bridge both cultures. I'm for whatever works, okay? But the linchpin of health, of our immune system, is trusting your body, loving your body, basically self-love that is grounded. And from that ground, we can complete our mission in the world, love others, serve others. But we have to dig in deep into our ancestral issues, karmic issues, everything that's buried in our unconscious or subconscious, bring it into the light. It's the shadow side of ourselves, and love it into health and into harmony. And you can't get that from external treatments, whether those treatments are Western or Eastern, whether you're getting a drug or getting acupuncture, you ultimately still have to take responsibility and ownership of the chi flowing through your meridians, your organs, flowering out as your personality and, your desires in the world. That has to come from within. That has to engage your imagination, your creative free will. And so when this pandemic hit, I was not worried in the least because I trusted my body, and I'm very grateful, in fact, for this pandemic because everybody started studying health and becoming, well, what's a virus? Eventually, what's the virome? And began to understand, it brought into consciousness so many things, okay? The differences between field theory or terrain theory and germ theory, okay? So germ theory has been the darling of the scientific establishment, but it's really an outdated kind of half-true theory. Of course, there are germs, they're bacteria, but do they control our health, or is it the field, the whole terrain of our body that controls it? So Chinese medicine is a field theory. It doesn't try and attack germs or pathogens in particular. It tries to balance the overall yin and yang forces in the body, or the 5 elemental forces. When the pandemic struck in Wuhan, China, they had no drugs, no vaccines. They were forced to rely upon traditional Chinese medicine, or that's TCM, or its predecessor, we could say CCM, classical Chinese medicine. The Communist Party invented TCM in 1950, trying to make a uniquely Chinese scientific approach. They just took their qualities, methods from CCM, stripped it down, made it a little bit less spiritual, but kept many of its benefits. So TCM and CCM, they have a long history in China of dealing with epidemics, over 320 of them since the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago. So this is nothing new, okay? Inflammation, heat in the body, okay, they have herbs, they have ways to take that heat out. They're not attacking the germ. There's one virus there. No, they're trying to say, we need to get the heat out. That's the excess thing. And once the system is cooled off, it can start to take care of itself. And after they get the patients through the crisis phase, they said, okay, now you need to rebuild your immune system. Go home and do, here's some Qigong practices, rebuild it. So all of this has been suppressed by the media in the West, that this was so effective in China. And it's suppressed for a simple reason. Along with other things that were tried in China, including vitamin C infusions. They're used in Shanghai successfully, 100% efficacy with people hospitalized, okay? All of this is suppressed, censored. There is a definite and clear censorship campaign going on. Even the Senate has investigated Facebook for coordinating with Google and Twitter on what they're going to censor and what the pages they're going to take down. The FDA sent out notices to 150 different natural healers and even doctors who were saying, hey, folks, you need to take on more vitamins, and this is the key thing here, okay? They sent a warning letter saying, you can't do that. You can't say that. But in fact, there have been studies now of hospitalized COVID patients, high doses of vitamin D, 100% effectiveness, getting them out of the hospital. All of this is suppressed. It's censored. If you put anything in there talking about all this stuff, you're at risk of being deplatformed. Why? What's the fear? Well, as I said, the big five have an agenda, and there's $1 trillion pie there of vaccine sales and vaccine distribution. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK as he's known, I think put it most succinctly. He said, you need to understand that the CDC is just a government vaccine company. They make $35 billion a year from vaccines. So they're extremely biased. And when any time there's any study or evidence comes up that questions that, there have been whistleblowers who've testified that that evidence has been destroyed. Congress never investigates. Why? Could it be because Big Pharma has 2 lobbyists for every senator and every congressman in Washington, D.C.? That's over 1,200 lobbyists. That's amazing. And the amount of money that's being used to influence our government medical policies. This is what the middle ground, the energetic healers, are up against. This big five are very powerful, and they're trying to censor and disempower the individual using fear so that you will, out of fear, buy into germ theory, that there's this dangerous virus out there that is trying to attack you and kill you, and that we have a war on nature in order to save you. So this war on nature is doomed to failure just by definition, because human nature is part of nature. Like I say, we're in a cycle here. Viruses are actually our friends. They mutate so rapidly. They are what empower the Tao to do rapid levels of change. We have other levels of our system that allow slower adaptations, our biome, our genetics, our genome. But it's the viruses that allow us to quickly mutate and adapt, moment to moment. And you can just look inside the human body and see this, that we have this underlying, the genome, 20,000 genes give us stability. And what's very interesting, though, is that studies are now showing that most of what we call our personality, our patterns, our outlook, our beliefs, our experience of life is based not on hardwired genes, but on epigenetic patterns. And this is exactly what the energetic healers and the chi cultivators are impacting. The 99% of us that's open to being modified. And this is what energetic healing is doing. It's modifying those epigenetic patterns. So if you want to use the language of science, you can see that what all the presenters at this Congress are doing is just saying, hey, here's one way I found to modify, some aspect of, consciousness and embodiment. And those really are just changing the epigenetic patterns if you're using the language of science. But those take time to change those epigenetic patterns, and that's why you have a practice, and you have to cultivate deeply to get the results. Then you have the biome, which has got about 200 trillion bacteria, and which we're discovering more and more is so important, and connected to our diet and to many other things, but that is the mainstay of, maintaining, our immune system. And I like to I kind of laugh. I think back to um, when I would challenge my father, a heart surgeon, with various diets I was trying out, this and that, and he'd laugh and poo-poo it all because he went to medical school, back in the 1940s, and this is like diet. Yeah, sure, you need enough calories or this or that, but now, of course, the field is crowded with doctors out there hawking books and vitamins and special diets, this and that, and it's like mainstream medicine that diet and the biome is so important. Okay, so that's great. That just shows how slow progress is, but it is still progress. And I think that this pandemic will do the same thing for the virome. And the virome is estimates range between 360 trillion viruses that we produce inside of our body, anywhere up to a quadrillion. They're so tiny, so small, they're very hard to count. And the virome steps in when the biome is not able to handle an infection or inflammation or something. There's some imbalance there, and the bad bacteria are outnumbering the good ones. The virome steps in. So the viruses are our allies. They're incredibly smart. They may be some of the highest form of intelligence on the planet. And there have been studies done by science look back, I don't know exactly how they're able to detect the viral signatures, from millions of years ago, but there have been studies doing exactly that, and they've come up with the conclusion that viruses have been a major factor in the evolution of humanity, and that that's a positive influence. I mean, it looks like it's terrible, but if it's taking out the average age who died during the pandemic was 80 years old. Okay, so in a sense, what happens when someone's exposed to the virus, and you've got trillions, hundreds of trillions of viruses inside of you that are basically constantly exchanging with the environment, just like we're exchanging with the bacteria. Okay, and the level of coherence, of integrity of your virome, your biome, your genome, which to the Taoist way of thinking, they're all sustained by the life force. If we have our meridians open, our organ spirits functioning, with the chi is flowing, then the genome, the biome, and the virome will do their job. They need the energy, they need the love, they need the support, the integrity to do their job. And so then if a so-called COVID-19 probably engineered virus floats into our field, then it's just a choice. Oh, how do we want to respond to it? Do we want to take it in and allow it to replicate? So this is where you see the idea of taking responsibility is so key. For most people, that decision to replicate that virus in them is unconscious, but it's still their choice of their system and their body mind. And we have to just accept that as natural and healthy, not as a terrible tragedy. In fact, it's strengthening us to find out what our weaknesses are. And maybe that we have a bad diet and bad health. And so when you have a crisis and you get sick, then you're forced to deal with that reality. That's a good. And if you die from it, it just means that you said, okay, my destiny here is over. I'm going to move on to other dimensions. And that's not a tragedy either. Okay. This is just one realm. Okay. From the Taoist point of view, the Qi cosmology, all dimensions are virtual. They're all just made out of chi patterns, whether it's a slowly vibrating physical dimension, higher dimensions they call prenatal or early heaven, or the primordial heaven. They're all virtual. They're all just made out of chi vibrating. And they have various patterns, and they have, we can say physical bodies or subtle bodies, doesn't matter. They're all virtual. And so we're always just shape-shifting within these different realities. So we just need to stop looking at it through the lens of fear. It's mostly fear of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen when we die, and so we scatter at the moment of death, and this creates a big problem. It's like creating psychic pollution. And then other souls have to come in and clean it up. So from the Taoist point of view, again, this is about maintaining integrity and making a choice. How do you want to respond to this, we'll say, the increased prevalence of a highly infectious form of the flu, which can trigger underlying, comorbidities, underlying factors that could lead to other illnesses or even death. And I have friends who've suffered from this. There's no question. I'm not denying that there's a very nasty form of coronavirus, flu out there, which is, impacting people. But I'm just pointing out that if you take the big picture view of it, okay, it's evolutionary. And each of us has to go through it and find our own power within this. And this is what we're learning here at this Congress, how to empower ourselves, how to activate, how to plug into source and get the chi from the core of ourselves to come out and flow through our system and radiate out into the world as our destiny. And when we've completed that destiny, we're fine to leave here and we're done. We've graduated from the Earth School. So again, Tao is about change. It's about flow. It's about self-acceptance. Okay. And it's about harmony, living in harmony with nature, not conducting a war on nature. That is doomed to fail. Health does not come from the tip of a vaccine, needle. That I am not opposed to vaccines. The original vaccines were fine. In fact, there's another 200-year-old technology, which is basically outdated. It's a one-size-fits-all. Everybody gets the same vaccine, okay? But modern medicine is like, oh no, everybody needs custom, genetically targeted medicines just right for your body, or time-release capsules. The medicine is perfect for your system. That's where medicine is going, even Western medicine. The vaccines are just really a big money-making machine because they can multiply out and sell it to billions of people on the planet at the same time. So do we want to let our health system be corrupted by money? Do we want to let science be corrupted by money? Well, it already is. That's just the reality. It's our job holding the middle ground here, though, until this pandemic passes and until this, maybe it's a desperate dying gasp by big pharma, okay? To reassert its germ theory, and which, by the way, modern science doesn't support that either. Quantum mechanics is all about field theory. There's no, the idea that there's one little bacteria that's the causative factor would be considered to be antiquated in physics, okay? Everything is these vast fields of interacting energies. And so germ theory is not supported by quantum mechanics, okay? So we just have a period we're going through where this is just the reality. These big gang of five is pushing this agenda, censoring us, those of us who are holding the middle ground here. And all we can do, in the I Ching, that says, well, you have to just retreat and you endure until that false yang cycle passes and come back out and restore true yin and true yang, interactions and harmony. But so, I think it's important to see that this is not just talk or not just theory. I mean, I can just share my own experience. I have not changed anything during this pandemic. I am still teaching live courses. I taught in Holland, week-long retreat and several workshops at the height of the pandemic. I taught week-long summer retreats in my home and at various events since then. Probably there's 12 or 13 different events since this pandemic has begun. All of them live, without masks, without obsessive compulsive hand washing, without social distancing, crowded together, but with a focus on creating a powerful, integrated, coherent chi field. And in that type of field, nobody gets sick. And nobody has gotten sick. So that to me is the real proof in the pudding here. Okay, this is not just talk. This is not just a theory. Oh, Chinese medical theory versus Western, germ theory, blah, 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 blah. No. So I know some people are not comfortable with that, and that's fine. I mean, everybody should make decisions for themselves for, that work for them, that empower you. And sometimes we need things from the outside to empower us. Sometimes we get it from the inside, or, it's always a blend of the two. Anyway, my hope is that others, like, I've relied upon the primordial Tai Chi, the inner smile to my genome, my biome, and my virome. I've relied upon that feeling of self-love and integrity, and on a form that I created for myself called blissful breathing Qigong. It builds up your metal element and creates a shield and strengthens the respiratory system, which is not just breathing external air, but breathing internally through the channels. And that combination has kept me healthy and alive, and I'm planning to live for many, many, many decades. My guide, when I turned 50, I was doing 5 hours of Qigong and internal alchemy meditation, and then I heard this voice come in, clear, loud voice. It's kind of like what you might call the God voice or goddess voice. He said, "Are you willing to serve for another 100 years?" I said, "What? Who's asking that?" Okay, who else could it be? It's like I'm hearing it inside myself. There's nobody else around. And what am I? No, I don't want to do it. Not actually. I said yes. Okay, sure. But okay, so I'm 50. I'm signing up for another 100 years. That's 150. So now I've created the 150 Club. And a combination of internal practices and external developments in medicine and anti-aging, I think I'll get there. And I hope that some of you join me on that journey and that you find the inspiration that you need at this. Thank you for listening. Blessings on your journey.